Goedemiddag.
Goedemiddag.
Okay, I'm here with Tabzz from Lemondogs. I'm going to do one of my grilled interviews with him. And the person I want to start with you actually is, most people will probably only, like mainstream fans, only tend to watch the biggest tournaments, okay, so IEMs, etc.
Yeah.
And so I imagine most of them probably won't really know your name until you join Millenium. So I want to talk just a little bit before we get into that about the time before then.
Before Millennium.
Yeah. So the first team that I noticed that was like significant for you was this Eclypsia team.
Yeah.
So initially you were in like a sister team of Eclypsia or something, and then that split up, and then you came into like the main Eclypsia team or something. Like what happened there?
Something like that. Well, what happened is that after I left my previous team before Eclypsia, which was Western Wolves, I joined them. We made a lineup. I remember it was with Youngbuck and Liumi, Lunette and Blood Dragon. And we played like one LAN. I think we played Campus Party back then in Berlin. And after that we split up because we didn't really want to continue with each other. It wasn't really working out that well. And then I got the offer by ImSoFresh, who was currently the jungler of the main Eclypsia team, to join them because he was like very interested in my mid play and he really wanted to have me on his team. And I joined their team, and the first time I played with them, like the atmosphere in the team was really bad. Like,
In what way?
like they were always whining, and the AD carry was never happy about anything, and the top laner was Freddy at that point, and he wasn't really. He really didn't like my mid play style, which was assassin based. So Diana, Fizz, Kha'Zix back then. I was playing a lot of those heroes, and he was more of a fan of what Schley I used to play. It was like mid lane that got kicked. And he used to play Anivia and Karth. There's more of the defensive mids that don't really make plays but farm up for late game. And it kind of caused a breach in that team. And ImSoFresh wanted to continue with me, and the rest didn't want to like continue with the team at all. So two of them left, like Freddy left top lane, and the AD carry left. It was who was it? I can't remember his name. Killwar. It was Killwar back then. Yeah, I don't know if you heard of him, but and then we created the Eclypsia that's. Got second place at Tales of the Lane. Yeah, it was me mid, Fresh jungle, enemies top, and Hadel and Kuja bot lane. And we actually had some pretty good success with that team, but after a while we started losing a lot, and it didn't really go as well as earlier. So we decided to make some change in that team as well. We replaced our top laner and our support, and we got two members of the previous Curse.EU team. It was Creaton and
Angush.
Creaton and Angush, yeah. And we had some pretty decent success as Millennium, and in the start we were like dominating the scene really hard in EU. Like, there was nobody who could win a scrim against us. And eventually, like we placed. Well, the first LAN we played here was IM Cologne, which we ended up not doing that well in, but we still beat out most EU teams. And then it was the qualifier for season 3, the first qualifier, and everyone really expected us to win that. We're like the top team that should have made it. Everyone's like 80% that Millennium will make it into season 3. This qualifier, they're pretty much safe, and so did we. We thought the same. We bootcamped before, we trained really hard, and we felt very confident. And we made it easily through the group stage, and we went into the playoffs against. Like the semifinals against Bulls, and we ended up losing that, which is really surprising for us. Like after the first game, people got like really angry at each other, like how can we lose? We really didn't understand how we lost, and then we just lost 0-2 to a team that we really thought would be really easy to beat. And it really demotivated us. We were like, afterwards, we were like, what do we do now? Like, we lost against Wolves. We were like the worst team in the qualifier. That was like what we were thinking. And they made it into LCS and we didn't. And the next day, we had to play Mim in the loser bracket, but our spirits were already so down that we really didn't have a chance of winning it. And so after that qualifier, we didn't make it in. We still trained. We didn't, not that much. We trained like 4 hours a day for like IEMs, and actually, we ended up going to the World Championships IM Hanover, which we placed 4th, I can remember.
5th to 6th, I think.
5th and 6th? I can remember losing the semifinals in Frost. But was it semifinals?
No.
Or was it quarterfinals?
It was that relegation round where the teams who came 2nd and 3rd play each other before the semis.
Anyway, yeah. So we did all right there. We actually placed I think the highest of any EU team there. And we did a pretty decent run against Frost, which is considered the best team in the tournament. And I think they ended up winning it as well. Or they lost the place, right? Yeah, they lost the place. So they got second and first. But we were pretty happy about our performance in that tournament. And after that, we kept training a bit. But we didn't manage to make it even into the Season 4 qualifiers. There's like a lot of things happened, and like people were really demotivated in our team, and we just didn't manage to make it Season 4. So the team pretty much split up after that. Everyone went their own way. And I got an offer from, at that time, a team called Sinners Never Sleep, who qualified for the qualifier itself, and probably had the easiest route into LCS. They had to beat TCM and then Against All Authority. It was probably the easiest route to get into LCS. And I gladly took their offer to play them as AD carry. A few days before they gave me the offer, I actually extended like the will that I want to join a team as AD or mid to some managers, and the word got around, and they ended up taking me, which I was really happy with. I was really surprised. I expected not to be able to be into Season 3 at all. After Millennium lost, I didn't expect any team would pick me up. So it's really a surprise that I'm here now actually with them and doing so well. So we qualified. We won 2-1 against TCM and 3-0 against All Authority. And all 5 games we won. I played Caitlyn, by the way, so everyone was calling me like the one trick pony. I only play Caitlyn every game. But we qualified with it anyway. So the first few weeks of LCS were really rough. There were some internal disagreements in the team, and we just ended up not consistently winning. We were just we hit a brick wall. Eventually, like our duo lane didn't really work out together. So then we decided to bring in mithy and kick out wewillfailer, our old support, because mithy would synergize much better with our playstyle, our picks, and with me as well in bot lane. And since we've got him, I think we've gone like 11-2 now, or 11-3. I can't really remember. It's not a really good score anyway. And yeah, that's basically the tale of where we are now. We've been practicing a lot, 8 hours a day of actually playing the game with like a break in between. And our hard work's been paying off, and we're first on the ladder now and seeming pretty solid.
So as you say, that's basically like the story of your career so far. I just kind of let you go with that one. Yeah. So I want to get into some specifics now. So let's leap back to the Eclypsia time. Okay. So you mentioned the big result for Eclypsia was this second place at Tales of the Lane. And the downside of that tournament, okay, it sounds weird. Okay, you finished second at this offline tournament, but the downside of it is all people remember about Tales of the Lane is Curse.EU beating M5 and then winning the tournament. Yeah. So unfortunately, you guys beat SK, you got to the final, you lost in 3 games, but people only remember it for that result. Oh, that was the tournament where Curse.EU beat them. So what I want to know is, like, the SK team you beat there, like, how actually good were they at the time, the SK team you beat?
The SK team, well, they definitely had a lot of flaws in their gameplay. I can still remember our picks being a lot better than them, and we ended up crushing them in like 20 minutes in one of the games. So I had Katarina against Ocelots and Nivea, and we just ended up diving bot like really early and took control of the game, 1 in 20 minutes. And after that, like the second game was a bit more difficult, I think. It was a bit closer, but we ended up still taking it pretty convincingly. And SK at that time, there wasn't such a bad team. I think we were just better. We had the better picks as well on that patch, so we just ended up winning it pretty convincingly.
So in the final, like I mentioned, you got to play Curse.EU, and they themselves had just had this huge result where they were like the second European team to actually ever beat Moscow 5 offline. They beat you in the final, and your match was actually closer than the Moscow 5 match was. Like, how good were actually they at the time? Like, because a lot of people won't remember that lineup because it only lasted for about 3 weeks, that specific lineup, you know. So were they actually like, was them beating Moscow 5 like a one-off? Were they actually like a team who could have been this good? What do you think?
Curse.EU, well, we were main scrimming partners with Curse.EU for like a few weeks before that. We just scrimmed each other all the time. And they were really good. They had very good mid player, extinkt. It was always really fun to play against him. It was really challenging to win mid against him. And they had a very good bot lane. It was Super Ace and Creaton, if I can remember correctly. Yeah. And so they had a very strong lineup at that point. I think even a stronger lineup than M5 had. maybe, like, and they really crafted their strategy against M5 very well. Like, even 2 weeks before the tournament even played, they really wanted to beat M5, so they just crafted a strategy that in their eyes could really beat M5 very easily, and they managed to do it. They managed to take them out, and yeah, I think Curse.EU was actually a very strong team at that point.
So after this, you join up with Millenium, and the interesting thing is, like you mentioned in your description, actually, 2 of the players from Curse.EU played in this lineup, Angush, the top laner, and Creaton, who we all know now as the AD carry. The thing about this lineup in Millenium, though, was, like, the buzz online from all the other teams was that, like, oh, this team will definitely make it, even from the other pro players.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, people might remember when I describe it now, but the whole reason why Bergson said that his own team, Wolves, probably wouldn't make it into LCS is because he even said before the tournament, like, oh, for them to make it in, they have to, like, not play Millenniums. They have to, like, win their group and not face them. And so instead they face you directly, and they actually managed to beat your team, though, 2-0. When you think back now, bearing in mind so many of the players in that Millennium lineup either are in LCS now or have been in or have the potential to be in LCS, etc. Was it really just like one day in a million that everything just went wrong? Like, was the team actually flawed, the Millennium team, and that just showed the flaws of that? What do you think? What is your sense for it now? It's so long ago.
Yeah, well, our matches versus Copenhagen Wolves at that time, we just picked our comfort picks, to be honest. It's really what we beat everyone as. So I would go mid assist. ImSoFresh would play Amumu or Kale jungle, and then we let Angush play Jack's top. And it's really how we won like every game, really convincingly in scrimmage. Just picked our comfort picks, and we thought we could dominate them easily if we had our comfort picks. So that's what we went for, and they had a strategy that could really beat our comfort picks very well. So it's like to be honest, it was like 1 in a million that we had to face them, and they had a strategy that could beat our comp very easily, which we had never faced before with their kind of champions that they picked and how they played. With a really defensive mid laner like Morgana and Zyra with teleport, and then they had like Cho'Gath jungle, and it was really hard for us to beat them or even gain an advantage over them. And I think you could call it like 1 in a million that they had this certain strategy against our team at that time. But it was also a failure on our part because we made a lot of mistakes that we shouldn't have made, and it was like just also really badly played by us. So yeah, this was a good strategy by them, but really poorly played by us as well.
Because it seems like the fact that you guys didn't make it into that season of LCS, okay, so you stuck around for a bit longer. You went to the IEM Sao Paulo, you went to the IEM World Championship, like you're mentioning there. Well, if we look at your results in these tournaments, these are like good results. Like, you're beating the teams who are around that level and below, and you're only really losing to like elite level teams. So like people like Blaze or Gambit. You're even beating like incredible Miracle teams who are good teams, like considered better than most of the European teams who are at the bottom of LCS that season. So it seems like if your team had made it into LCS, you'd probably still have stuck together. It'd be a much longer team, but the fact that you didn't sort of like forced your hand eventually that the team's probably going to split up.
Yeah.
Obviously you will conjecture here, okay? I don't want you to say that like you don't like Lemondogs now because you're top of LCS, but do you ever think back like what could have been if that Millennium team had made it into LCS Spring that season? Because if we remember that season, some of the teams who made it in over them, like Giants, Dragon Balls, these weren't very good teams. Yeah. So do you ever think like, would it have been like this season with Lemondogs now, like you would have been contending for the top? What's your sense for that?
Well, I think if that Millennium lineup went into Season 3 right from the start in the spring, then we would have been very motivated. I think we could have been one of the top teams, like top 3 probably. We had a very strong lineup. Like only our top laner was really kind of like didn't really fit well with the rest of the team, but the rest of our players were all really synchronized and played well together. And yeah, I think we could have definitely been at the top of the spring LCS.
Okay, so there's a weird scenario because the MYM team, who now plays in LCS, have a very similar lineup. They're one of the few teams who has almost the same lineup for almost a year or so. I think they've maybe changed one player in that whole time span. And during this whole period, you've played them a whole bunch of times, and it seems like in your career, they've always been like your nemesis. They beat you when you were in Eclypsia. They beat you at this qualifier here to get in with Millennium. They're the only team in LCS that your team actually has a losing record against. Is there something about their style of play that for you personally has been difficult over your career? What, like, for other teams can just destroy them. Sometimes they do well against other teams. What is it that's hard for you?
Well, yeah, in Millennium we lost it. In Eclypsia we lost to them at Campus Party. The Millennium we lost to them in the losers bracket, and we're actually in a losing matchup right now, like 1-2 against them. We have another game this weekend. We can maybe play even, but Yeah, they have a very specific play style that can snowball really hard if you make a mistake early game. And teams are like, as it comes to this LCS, I think we just didn't really have a strategy prepared to deal with it, and we just ended up losing to them like really hard, like twice, because we just didn't have any kind of like response to it. Even though we know what they do, we just couldn't reply to it in a way that would make us win. So yeah, I guess you could call them our nemesis, even though the other teams can beat them quite easily.
So the period up until you joined this team now was when you were playing mid. And in Europe, mid is like the position. And people often wonder, right, is it like a chicken and an egg thing with mid in Europe? Is it that all the best mids happen to live in Europe? Or is it that because everyone else is a good mid, then you have to have a good mid? I've always thought maybe it's like the second thing, because the idea is if every other team like has Froggen, Alexej, Xpeke, then if your team doesn't have a good mid, you're almost for sure going to lose that lane. So then it's going to be very hard to win the game. Back when you were a mid player, realistically, since you don't have to play those guys anymore, how well did you actually stack up against the top mid players in Europe? Were you actually on their level?
Yeah, I think I was on their level. I think the best mid laners in EU back then, they were probably extinkt, Bjergsen, and Alex. In my opinion, Alex was very good back then, even though he's not playing that well lately. And I think I managed to win like almost every lane against them and really do very well against the top mid laners back then.
So this is actually something I wanted to ask you about, is that people, we mentioned Extinkt here actually.
Yeah.
So he's a player where people, again, who only watch the LCS and the big tournaments, they'll have seen him this season, but he played top lane this season actually for his team. Whereas he's someone who had a lot of buzz around him from other pro players. I remember when he was in Curse.EU and then the other teams, because basically people said, I always saw a lot of AMAs with pros where when they asked, who's your favorite 5 mids in Europe or something, they would list, Froggen, Alexej, the obvious ones, but then they would always throw in Extinkt there. And so what is it about him as a player that what was he good at? Like, describe him as if someone had never seen his style of play, because some people will have never seen him play mid, and yet he's got this hype from other pros that he has recognition.
Well, he's incredibly skilled mechanically. He will never make a misclick or miss a skill shot, and he has very smart play style. He knows exactly what he can do and what he can't do, so it's very hard to win against him or pull an advantage against him, because he will see everything coming that you might do. That's why it's very challenging to play against. He has a very aggressive play style as well, so if you let him get ahead, he will really snowball the whole game into his team's favor.
Because I wanted to actually ask about that as well, is the strange thing is, with you going to AD and with Extinkt going to top lane, we've seen these players who in theory people would have said, I think actually a while back, Creaton, I think I saw him in an AMA months and months ago, he had to name his 5 mid laners that he'd pick. So he picked the obvious ones, then he actually put in Tabzz and Extinkt, and both those players eventually had to go to a different position to get into LCS. Realistically, if we put Extinkt on a team in mid lane and we put you on a team in mid lane, could you be on an LCS quality team just in your old positions, you think, now, in the current climate of mids?
Oh yeah, I think so, pretty easily. I seen me follow quite a similar path, to be honest. We both failed to qualify for the first split, and both failed to qualify for the second split as well, and then both ended up joining a team in LCS under a different role. So but I think that we could very easily match up to the other good mids, so maybe not beat them, but at least go even. Or I think so.
We were talking before about how you ranked yourself as a mid. I've often heard people say something interesting. Okay, so the old meta of how people thought of the jungler, people used to think, at least this is what I've read, back in season 2 and before, they used to think of the jungler, especially in the NA region, which is the most famous, as the jungler synergy with the top laner is the most important for him. Okay, but then in Europe, because we've got all these all-star mids, people say no, it's the jungler and the mid is the synergy that really matters. Do you think this is the case? Does it still hold today? And if so, is this a reason why you stayed with ImSoFresh in 2 of these teams, and you have this? What did you think of this period?
Well, playing with ImSoFresh, me and him had a lot of synergy. Would beat every mid jungler combo in scrims and games. I think that it was definitely more important. If you ask me now, I think it's better for the jungler to just have synergy with all lanes, not just mid. It's not really about just snowballing mid anymore like it used to be, and then the mid carries the whole mid game. It's not really how it works anymore. Now with lane swapping and a lot of different scenarios being possible, that the jungler really needs to also go to the side lanes a lot instead of just mid, and just really know where to be at all times.
So when I've mentioned some of the players who are in like multiple of these teams, when teams break up and they have arguments within the team, no one outside the team ever really finds out who said what and who was angry at who and who really was talking too much shit or something. But if you just look at the evidence as an observer, right? So I know nothing about the teams, I'm just going to look at the evidence.
Yeah.
So we had this Curse.EU lineup that beats M5 and they look really good. Like we've mentioned some of the players, Extinkt, Creaton, Angush, Meluno, these are all players who either are in LCS or were like considered top talents in Europe. Then we go to Millenium, you've got Creaton, Angush, these players. So we've got some of the same players, and basically the same thing happens in both scenarios. There's some good results, then there's some bad results, and the bad results lead to internal difficulties and the teams can't continue. They have to break up, leave, even though the talent is there, where people would say if you could keep that talent together, it probably could make it in LCS. So are there just specific people who were involved in all these cases, do you think? Is it like, what's your take on it then? Because what's going on here that these teams with the talent to make it can't keep it together?
Yeah, okay. So starting at Curse.EU, I believe there were a lot of internal difficulties with Angush and their jungler. They really weren't like happy at all. They were always like really like flaming each other in game apparently, and it really didn't work out. So Angush really wanted to leave, and like Creaton was really tired of his teammates flaming so much and like discussing so much all the time. He just wanted a team that could like beat people and be happy. So he just decided to leave together with Angush and to Millenium. And our Millenium lineup was quite like the emotional lineup, if I could call it that.
In what sense?
Because like Fresh was a really emotional player, so if something would go wrong, he would be like the guy that could really like turn a mood down, and it was the same with Heidal. He was a very emotional player as well. So it really leads to like kind of like a roller coaster ride in the team, you know, when things are going well, everyone's happy and everyone's like happy with each other and positive in games, and when things go wrong, it can go wrong really hard and really badly, and it can lead to many arguments that really make people hate each other, like really don't like each other anymore.
So we've mentioned here Angush, and he's someone who, even the public, I've seen people mention that they suspected he was one of the people who often had like problems with people in his team, and that's why when you start, you know, when you're winning, things are fine, you can overlook small issues, but then when you're losing, arguments are only going to get worse, etc. So what I wanted to ask was, since you got to play with him, some people say the reason that he's not in an LCS team now, the reason he's not at the top in Europe, is because during the Millennium period, a lot of people say like his skills fell off or he wasn't as good as he used to be, because people remember him fondly from 2012, you know. But then some people say the reason why he's not is because he can't get along with people, or people won't play with him because of these which is like realistic. Like, what do you think of Angush as a player, and why isn't Angush an LCS player now, considering his history?
Well, I think he's a very stubborn person by nature, and he will always argue with everything you tell him, and he will always convince that he's right. And if you have someone like ImSoFresh in our team that has to like that always wants to be right as well, it's really emotional as well, so they just go into each other like and just argue so much. And Angush, you could say, was he used to be very good in 2012. It was really known for like Warwick and Kael'Top being like the innovator of top lane, and he was very good in even Jax, like that kind of champions that were like his champions. And in our Millennium lineup, it just didn't really work out. He wasn't performing well at all. He was making a lot of mistakes and getting caught a lot, making bad calls late game. And even though what he was doing was bad, he would still try to argue that it was right, even though the rest of the team was like, yeah, you made a mistake, it was wrong. And he was like, no, I was right and you guys are wrong. And Fresh really couldn't deal with that either. He always got really mad at Angush. So you could say that is one of the reasons why Angush is not in an LCS team. Could be his attitude, and his skill up is not as good as it used to be in 2012 season 2.
So a player that you played with in Millennium is Creaton, and at the moment, people are get remembering him again now that he's come back to his team. But early on in this season, he was like the revelation of the season, you know, because he was like owning everyone up and he was playing amazing. But he's someone where people who have been around the scene in Europe, especially online or at the smaller tournaments, already knew like he was a very good AD, or they had very high opinions of him. You just didn't have a chance to like show it on like a world stage type scenario. Is his play this season and with his team now, does he just still play the same way he did in Millennium, the same way he did in Curse? Is he the same player? Has he changed in some way? What do you think?
I don't think he's changed at all. Actually, like his favorite champ is still the same. He really likes to pick Acer and Vayne, and He really plays a very dominant AD carry style. He makes very smart decisions in team fights. And back then, when we picked him up in Millennium, he was definitely the best AD carry in Europe by far, in our eyes at least. I think in every pro player's eyes, was probably one of the best AD carries around. And I think he doesn't really change much. He's still really good. He really barely makes any mistakes. It's really hard to capitalize on anything he does. And yeah, I think he's just a very good player.
So compare him then for like okay, let me phrase it like this. When people talk about the different regions and who's good in what, usually AD carriers, they'll talk about maybe China or something, and then for Europe they say the mids, and then for Korea, well, Korea's got almost everything, but maybe junglers or something, or top laners. So whenever people talked about Europe, I know Americans especially, that's the criticism they'd always say. Like the Doublelift would say, oh, all the ADs there suck, that's why they, it doesn't matter if you're AD there. And if you look at the most successful ADs in Europe, these are actually the really passive ADs. So you got like Yellow Pete, Genja. They aren't really like the kind of AD who like going to carry the whole game. So is Creaton like different to all the other ADs in Europe? Like how do you compare him to the others in terms of how he plays or his skills or whatever?
Yeah. I think he is like much more aggressive in team fights. You always see the opportunity to go in and make a play or an engage. And he really likes to play very aggressively, and also he doesn't ever really lose his lane. And I think if you want to compare him to Genja and Yellow Pete, then they are much more passive players, but I think their decision making is also a lot worse than Creaton's. In teamfight, they often don't see opportunities where they could make plays or engages or hit a carry instead of a tank for just a few seconds. And in that sense, like, Creaton is a lot better than other ADs because his teamfight decision making is just superb. Okay,
so we just talked there about how good Creaton is. You were talking before saying at mid you were like comparable to the top mids. Realistically, at AD right now, if we just drew a line under everything that's gone before and tomorrow doesn't exist, how good is Tabzz as an AD right now? Like, how would you compare against the Creaton or another AD carry? How good?
I would consider myself a bit under Creaton's level. I think he still plays with less weaknesses than I do. I think I still make more mistakes than he does, and he still has a better decision making, but I think I could be I think me, Freeze, and Candypen are like very close in terms of skill. Like a second, third, fourth, really, you can compare them. And I think that the rest of the AD carries, they don't really shine that much. Like Yellow Pete and Makler, I think they don't really tend to shine that much. Play passive, don't really make any big impact on the game like the other AD carries can.
When you talk about changing position, like a drastic position like mid to AD or mid to top or whatever, the position changes, the old kind of unwritten rule was that it didn't work at the top pro level. And we saw people who tried it, and there was never really a good example of someone doing it and being more successful at the new position than they were at their old one, And I did an interview with Chaox, the old AD for TSM back in the day, and he told me that his reasoning as to why he thought it didn't work to try and change like a big position was he described it like this: if he's playing AD carry, then not only does he know like all the matchups for all the champions and how to play versus them, but he said the crucial thing was like the small details. Like every time he dies and has to go to the base, he automatically knows from experience like exactly how, okay, I have 700 gold, that should go to this immediately. Whereas the idea is even the player who has the skills to play the new position, he starts playing it, he's going to have like little areas like that where he won't have the experience to know exactly like, which would be the right pick now versus this champion. Is his theory correct? Like, do you suffer from this at all?
No, but I think it's very much about experience and putting dedication into learning your new role. Okay. I think it's also about just playing a lot and just like optimizing your new role. But when I went from mid to AD, I didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing. I didn't know how to play the laning phase at all. Like when to poke, when to punish for CSing, when to just play passive. And I was making a lot of mistakes in the start. But if you like really put the effort into learning that new role, if you have the skills in the game itself, like you're gonna find out the new matchups, you're gonna find out which items to buy when you have that gold. The kind of habits that you're supposed to have after playing a role for a long time, they eventually develop if you put a lot of effort and dedication into it.
So if we mention then, okay, you officially as a competitive player, you haven't been playing AD very long, and I mentioned kind of the setup before. Europe isn't necessarily known for having the strongest individually skilled AD carries, and you're already competing with the best of them. Does it follow then that Europe doesn't really have the strongest ADs if you're able to so quickly catch up to guys like, Candy Panda, Yellow Pete, these guys have been playing AD their whole career?
It's hard to like call it maybe talent, but in the game itself, that you can adapt to new things quickly and learn it quickly is really important in a game like a MOBA, where the game is constantly changing, the meta is changing, the items are changing, right? It's patching heroes all the time. You need to be really responsive, reactive to what the game throws at you, and it kind of goes the same way in learning a new role. If you are really dedicated and you know how to approach learning something new and adapting to something, then you can reach the top very quickly. And it's also about having, like, if you play against really strong players in their roles, you will see their habits, you'll see how they play, you can analyze their replays, and you can kind of figure out how they play and what they're thinking when they're playing. And if you do that, then you'll become better much quickly if you play against them yourself. So in a region where the ADs are not so strong versus a region where the ADs are very strong, I don't think swapping roles would be much more difficult in NA to be if you could say like this, where the NA ADs are supposedly better than the Europe ADs. If you play against them a lot and you have the right mindset to learn, then you can become just as good as them, because you learn from their habits. So I don't think it's much easier to become part of the top in Europe.
Okay, this is how people will think when you've had a drastic role change. So like I've described before, it sounded like you were quite happy as a mid player, you thought you were doing well, you were just looking for a team potentially to get in, but then the opportunity came along, okay, I can join if I play AD. So you've swapped, and for now, it's working really well. Like, you're top of LCS, things are going really well, but people are always going to wonder, isn't the temptation going to be there? If one day, for some reason, Lemondogs isn't doing as well, or you personally aren't doing as well at AD, is there never going to be a time in your career where either you'll want to switch to mid, or you'll wonder, like, if I was still playing mid, like, maybe I'd be, like, better than the guy we have now? Or was it never going to happen?
Well, obviously, those thoughts sometimes occur in my mind, and if you would consider temptation to play mid and just stop playing AD, if I say Fnatic wanted to replace Expected, they're like, hey, do you want to play mid for us? Well, I would say no, I think, because that's just the kind of dedication I have to my team. Even though, like, I enjoy a lot of aspects of both roles. With mid, I enjoy, like, having a one-on-one mid, a solo lane, a skill matchup, and being able to control the pace of the game very well as a mid laner is, like, an aspect of the game and the role I enjoyed a lot. Just being able to roam around and make plays, which you don't really do as an AD carry. AD carry, you play more a passive early game, 2-on-2. It's more about poking, and you don't really kill each other unless there's, like, a really big skill difference. And yeah, as AD, I really enjoy, like, later in the game playing the team fights when I do have those items that can make a big impact, because then you suddenly become, like, a very important target in every fight, and you're able to make a very big influence in the fights, even more than a mid laner could most of the time. So there's, like, a difference in between what I enjoy between AD and mid, but it doesn't mean I enjoy one role more than the other. I think they're pretty equal to me.
So then an obvious follow-on question I have to ask is, you have to compare yourself as a mid and nukeduck as a mid.
Well, to be honest, he plays a more reserved style than I do. He plays very much to control his lane rather than make risky plays and control other lanes, like ganking. He doesn't really gank very often. He prefers placing a lot of emphasis in his gameplay on just controlling mid, getting the towers, contesting buffs. He picks kind of the same champions I used to pick, a lot of assassin-based champions like Ari and Zed, and even Fizz. So if I would have to compare myself to him, I think we're close in mechanical skill level when it comes to mid, and he is more the guy that wants to control mid, and I'm more the guy that likes to control the pace of the game.
Within the team, is there ever opportunity to actually make use of the fact you used to play mid? Like, do you ever help nukeduck out with how he's going to play a matchup, or tell him the experience of players you played at mid before? Like, I played him before doing this, he might try this, that, the other. Does that ever come into play?
Well, sometimes we discuss which champions could possibly be strong, and then that's even how our talent pick came into play, is because we're looking for assassins, which when our main assassins are banned out, and we're like, yeah, talent could be an option in certain scenarios. So we discuss sometimes about champions or items, but when it comes to play style, mine was different from his. So I don't really tend to give him advice on any matchup because he plays them so differently than I did. I just let him go his way, and it seems to work very well. He has a very good win ratio against, like, every other mid, so there's no real reason for me to interfere with his gameplay.
So this season of LCS, your team initially was like 4-6, I think was the record after 3 weeks. and then you removed wewillfailer.
Yeah.
After that, you've gone 11-3. And so on paper, it looks like, well, that was obviously the right move. You know, he must have been at least contributing to some of the problems before. You touched on it a little bit before. How much of the issue was that he wasn't fitting in the team, and how much was it something else that the new guy brought in? Like, what's the balance between the two, do you think?
Well, wewillfailer was causing a lot of problems in the team because he was a very hard guy to deal with. In terms of personality, he didn't really fit in with me and with nukeduck, and he had really different opinions about the game, and he was always like trying to be a leader, but the team didn't really agree with his opinions as a leader, so we didn't really like having him around sometimes. And he was always like discussing a lot as well in game. Like when someone makes a mistake, he would like get really angry, or in pre-mates he would get very emotional as well, and it was pretty detrimental to our team. And also he was not that good as a player compared to Mithy, for example. He would make a lot of mistakes or get caught or just do bad things. So if you would say what Mithy brought that wewillfailer didn't, would be that me and Mithy synergize much better than me and wewillfailer do, because we have the kind of same vision on the laning phase, whereas me and Failer had like Failer and me were very different in how we wanted to play the laning phase with each other. And Mithy generally makes very good calls as well. He doesn't really try to be the leader type, but does give very, very valuable input into the game. And that's about it.
So most players who are pros have only ever played one position, and a lot of them, they'll even say like, I don't know so much about the other matchups, or I leave them to do that. When I ask someone to normally name like the best player, they're probably just going to think of the position they play, because they themselves have played against the other people so often they'll have a good idea. You've played all the mids in Europe, you've played all the ADs now. Just from mids and ADs, who is the most skilled player in all of Europe from your time playing both positions? Who's the best out of the two, if you had to pick one?
So I could choose either AD or mid. Which one is like the most dominant?
Who's just the best? From playing them, like your experience actually just playing.
I would say extinkt in mid.
Okay. Then in that case...
That's the guy that has impressed me most out of any role so far. Really having flawless gameplay, like really not allowing you to take advantage of any situation that you could take advantage of against other mid laners. He would always have great farm, always have mag presence and lane control. It was very hard to play against him, but it was also very fun because playing against him you would learn a lot yourself. And yeah, he is definitely the most impressive player so far, in my opinion.
So if you pick him as the most impressive player, then is there a reason why he isn't an LCS player? Like, is there some reason why another team wouldn't give a chance to him? Because there's some players who are towards the bottom end of LCS who maybe could use a good mid.
I think if you wanted to, he could probably take some of the positions. But then again, you run into the same kind of issue we had in the spring split. Me and extinkt were both very like top tier mids looking for a team, but there's simply no one who was interested in replacing their current mid laner for one of us, even though like he was such a good player and teams could have used him very well. Partially also being maybe due to the language barrier. Some teams only played with like certain language, like Giants only talk Spanish, and Mim Mim wasn't else back then, but
Dragonborns maybe.
Yeah, he was actually a sub for Dragonborns, but they never decided to switch him in because for no reason. Like Shushe was kind of like the poster boy of Dragonborn, so even though maybe his teammates would rather have extinkt, then he was the team captain and the poster boy, so they couldn't really replace him. And it was probably the same with Ocelot back then.
Okay, so for my last question, I always like to do it hypothetical. Okay, so imaginary scenario. Yeah. So for you, I've got a really strange one, but just go with it, okay? Yeah. So you've played all the mids in Europe, you've played all the ADs in Europe, you've even played with mids and ADs in Europe because you swap positions. So aliens come to Earth. They say, we're going to destroy the Earth unless a super team made by Tabzz can defeat the alien team. But here's the thing, because they know you've played the two positions and you're like a unique scenario, they want to know which other players who played mid or AD could swap position. And so you have to make a super team where every position is either a mid or an AD, but except for the mid and AD, the other three positions have to be one of those two positions who could swap. So you have to pick a player who you think, I think he'd actually make a good jungler. You know, that guy actually could play top. Who would you pick?
From only a pool of mid and ADs. So for my top laner, I would take extinkt. then I would take Creaton jungle.
Give me a reason for each. Like what sets them apart from the others?
I think Creaton is very good in like aggressive decision making, and I think he also used to play jungle before in the Acer lineup. He was a jungler and he was doing very well. He can play very good jungle, and is a very versatile player. So I would like to have him as my jungler. And extinkt already showed himself that he can play top lane at a very good level. He was even considered one of the best top laners. Okay. So I would take extinkt top, Creaton jungle. I would put myself in mid.
Okay. Sure.
I would put. Can I put an AD player as my AD or a mid player? I would probably place Candy Panda as AD.
Okay.
And because I think from the ones, like I think he is like really good at AD, and yeah, I honestly couldn't like give another reason. I just really like how he plays, so I would place him as my AD.
Okay, last position, support.
And support, wait, I had to think about support. Which ones would I put as support? Actually, no, I can change my mind about AD. Okay. I like to put Pekka as AD.
Xpeke as
AD? Yeah. I would like to put Xpeke as AD because actually when I played with him in Solocon, he played AD. He made some very good decision making, and he was really good as AD. Actually, I was impressed like how good he was as an AD carry. So I would like to have him as my AD carry player, and then I would probably swap Candy Panda to support and let him support Xpeke.
Okay. Do you have anyone you want to thank or say hello to from this interview?
Well, I would like to thank our sponsors, my team, for being there and practicing hard and making this possible, and also my family for supporting me through everything I've been in so far with esport and letting me do all of this. Especially like big thanks to my mother as well for supporting me. She's like my #1 fan. So.
Dankjewel.
Dankjewel. Geen probleem.